know that there's something so special about you and me, babe. You got me, you got me, you got me. So just say the words, cause you know what it means to me, babe. When you got me, you got me, you got me.
Hey, it's time for Improve with Auntie, a clever advice-slinging roundtable for aunties like us. I'm Andrea Klender, your advice column curator. Don't listen to me, listen to our esteemed panel of contributors.
I know that there's something so special about you and me, babe. You got me, you got me, you got me. So just say the words, cause you know what it means to me, babe. When you got me, you got me, you got me.
Well, aunties, we've come to that point in our episodic relationship where it's time to talk about sex. It is the season of Valentine's Day, after all, depending on when you're listening to this. But we kind of decided in this episode that Valentine's Day can be year-round if we want it to be, and not at all if we don't want it to be. It can be about romance and partnerships, or it can be about loving ourselves. And today I'm talking with three super smart, super experienced aunties about talking with our nieces and nephews about bodies and love and autonomy and consent and emotions. It's all there. This was a hugely broad topic that I dropped onto the roundtable, and per usual, I didn't know what direction it was going to take. And I think regardless of what time of year you're listening to this episode, you are going to get so much from it to help you be a better auntie and a better, happier, more fulfilled and satisfied human. Also, this episode is special because all three of my guests are also seasoned podcasters. You can't get much more experienced than that. I have Karen Yates, a somatic sex educator and the host of the podcast Wild Sublime, triple threat Andrea Fellows Fineberg, librettist, director of community engagement at a prominent opera company, as well as the host of Key Change, and Helen King, New Zeland-based podcast editor, yes, we are international folks, and the host of the C Word Radio. Now, as auntie to three young girls myself who are all under the age of 5, some of these more complex explorations into emotional engagement, bodily autonomy, and empowerment aren't really yet quite part of my experience, though we're having a lot of conversations about gender lately. However, it's interesting, as always, to look at that legacy of the generational stuff that we grew up with and how we are either continuing that forward or making changes in how we relate to the young folk in our lives. I want to point out that the show notes in this episode are particularly important because there are so many excellent resources listed there. You can find those at improvewithauntie.com, linked, of course, in the episode description in your listening app. And in general, I love recommending that if you're going to buy books, rather than checking them out from your local library, that you take a look at bookshop.org. Bookshop.org is a nonprofit organization that enables you to purchase your books online from the comfort of your home, and a percentage of the proceeds go to support local independent bookshops rather than Amazon and the big behemoths, and a portion of your purchase at no additional cost to you actually helps to support Improve with Auntie. You can find our specific link to Bookshop in the show notes as well so that they know that we sent you. Before we get to the candy hearts, I just want to remind you that we are strongly considering a season 2 of Improve with Auntie. I really want to keep making this show, and in order to do that, I need your help. We want your stories, your proud auntie moments, your auntie fails, and your questions for the aunties. And you can record your voice telling your story or asking your questions. Just make a voice memo on your phone, no big deal, and upload it at bit.ly/askaunties. Or if you'd really rather just email and have one of us read it on the show, you can also send it to Andrea@thecreativeimposter.com with the subject line, Improve with Auntie. Also, you may not realize this, but this show takes a lot of work from a lot of folks to come together. Each episode of Improve with Auntie costs around $500 to produce, and it takes about 10 to 15 hours for me personally to craft. And for season 2, I have a goal of actually compensating our contributors to the roundtable for each episode with an honorarium. So that budget is actually going to increase. If you would like to consider becoming a producer of the show with a one-time financial contribution in the amount of your choice, it would so help us meet our goal for production expenses so that we can bring you another season. The link to contribute is at thecreativeimposter.com/Auntie tips. Of course, all of these can be found in those fabulous show notes that I talked about before, as well as a link to get on our Cool Aunties newsletter so that you never miss an opportunity to connect, to contribute, to be part of the show, and to listen to the very next episode. Our Cool Auntie List sign up is at bit.ly/Cool Auntie List. You can find everything at improvewithauntie.com. And now, are you ready for some candy? I mean that, like, candy for your ears. One more quick aside, there was a moment in the show where I completely lost the connection. Yes, even as a seasoned podcaster, technology sometimes still fails us. And because I had a roundtable of podcast hosts, they didn't skip a beat. They just kept on going. So I hope you enjoy this super special Valentine's self-love, touchy-feely, ew. Sounds kind of weird. Touchy-feely Valentine's episode of Improve with Auntie. Welcome, everyone, to Improve with Auntie. Thank you so much for being here on our Valentine's Day episode. I thought that we could start out introducing our roundtable of aunties today by sharing your name, where in the world you are currently located, who you are auntie to, and celebrating Valentine's Day. Yay, nay, or ambivalent? You got to vote. I'm Andrea Klunder, and I am based in Chicago, and I am ambivalent leaning towards nay on Valentine's Day.
I'm Karen Yates. I am recording also in Chicago. I am auntie to a very dear friend's daughter who is now an adult, but I have a special relationship with her. Valentine's Day, I would say yes, but put yourself first.
Hello, I'm Andrea Fellows Fineberg. I am in the land of enchantment, aka New Mexico. I actually have three nieces and three nephews, and then I have 5 great niece-nephews. 3 great nieces and 2 great nephews. Valentine's Day. I don't know. Why? I mean, love is good, right? So I'm with Karen on the yay. And celebrating it one day and making the stakes that high is a big nay for me.
Valentine's Day all year round?
Sure.
Why not? It's like I always say, a month for your birthday, right? Everyone gets a whole month for their birthday. And Valentine's Day, I don't know. Helen, what do you think?
Yeah, so I'm Helen. I am in Auckland, New Zealand. So technically I'm in the future. I am an aunt to a very rambunctious 8-year-old boy and a headstrong wee girl who is, at the time of recording, she is coming up to 5. So just entering the world, really. And Valentine's Day, you know, the cynic in me says no. But then I think the nicest thing that's ever been done for me on Valentine's Day was when I was a kid and my mum put a chocolate heart in my lunch. And I feel like those little things I think are really sweet and kind. But just one day, I have mixed feelings about it, I think.
Okay, so going back to elementary school, I will say that I liked Valentine's Day in elementary school when we did the thing where we got a box full of funny Valentines and we gave them out to everybody and you got one from everybody. And there was like the whole like Valentine's exchange at school. I liked that version of Valentine's.
Yes.
Even with the politics that came with who was getting the best Valentines in the box and then who was getting the one that said something like, "Hey, pal," or something like that. And then it wasn't until the dating years, I think around like middle school, high school somewhere, it started to get super awkward. And at our school, they would do things like you could buy balloons and flowers and Valentine's grams for other people at school. And literally I never received one. And I was like, this is bullshit. I'm not doing this.
So you're advocating for a communal Valentine's Day. That's excellent, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think also there was a lot of learning that happened because there were definitely those kids that I didn't want to even give the crappy Valentine to. And so there was, a little bit of a learning curve about how we include everyone, except people who don't observe holidays for religious reasons, because we had a few of those too, which was very confusing.
It's really interesting because Valentine's Day hasn't really been a huge thing in New Zealand. And when you talked about elementary school and getting cards, all I can think of is the Simpsons episode where Ralph gets the cards from Lisa, the "you choose me."
I forgot about that. We will have to find said episode on YouTube and link to it in the show notes for this episode.
So I always think if someone gave me that card, I'd be really excited.
It's the power of that small gesture. The you choose me, or the conversation hearts. I love the conversation hearts. I'm just going to own that on Valentine's Day.
Only if they're sweet tart brand. I don't like the really sugary ones. I only like the sweet tart ones.
No, I don't mean to eat them. I like the idea of them.
Yeah.
And the two different sizes. I don't know. There's just something aesthetically satisfying about them. That's all.
That's fair. That's fair.
Valentine, you know it's not too late. Valentine, you know you still can be my date. Valentine.
But this isn't just an episode about Valentine's Day. Valentine's Day is really just the excuse to talk about love and dating and relationships and sex and sexuality and gender identity and gender expression and all of these topics. This is a very broad topic area that we can get into here about how do we talk with our nieces and nephews about this topic area. And being as that my nieces are quite small, a lot of this is questions for me and not a lot of experience so far. And I know Karen and Andrea having some older young ones in their life, we had a conversation on episode 1 about gender neutral terms for nieces and nephews. And the suggested term is nibbling, and I cannot. Have you not heard this, Helen?
No, that's not.
What?
That's not better.
None of you have heard this?
That's not better.
Yeah.
You mean my nibblings?
My nibblings.
Nipplings or nibblings?
Nib. Like the nieces and nephews of your siblings. Nibblings.
That's hilarious.
This is a legitimate word in the dictionary.
Oh, hell no.
No.
Well, why not just niblets then?
Nipplings? That's very interesting.
Nibblings. I get the sibling, niece-nephew merge. That's that landscape we're all navigating though right now. What is gender neutral? What is the gender neutral term? Excuse me. I know what gender neutral is, but it's a thing and it matters.
How about Nephas?
All of these sound like mythological or sci-fi creatures. Yeah. I'm not sure.
Didn't we just establish, though, that sometimes we are aunties to those that are not associated with our siblings, that the auntie role is this, it has this larger place in our culture and our society that's not necessarily direct, like, that's my sister's child.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a really good point because growing up, especially on mum's side of the family, we had Auntie Fee, who was my grandma's cousin, but she was always Auntie Fee, or Auntie Win, who was just a friend of my grandmother's, so an older woman in our lives. In New Zealand, there is a sort of, I guess, a colloquial thing of saying, the nephs, so the nephews. Mm-hmm. Or auntie can often just be, an older woman, like a term of endearment or, just that sort of, hey, auntie, or, auntie did this. And so I think there are those sort of nuances of where you are.
So keeping that in mind as well, with our young folks who may be nibblings or may not or whatnot, whoever they are in our lives. Those people who come to us for sage advice and wisdom and playtime that's way cooler than playtime with their parents and whatever it is at whatever age. When I proposed this topic to you, what is something that came to mind that felt like an important thing to talk about?
I think the first thing that came into my mind was, and I was thinking the nibblings being older, I'm sorry. This is going to crack up. What's cracking up? This is going to crack me up. The nibblings being older.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, because I was thinking adolescence, right? Or later adolescence. Whatever you're going through now in your life, adults go through the same thing. I think there is like this sense that there'll be a point where I will know I will have achieved wisdom in this area. But a lot of the same questions you are asking yourself now, you will continue to ask in a different way, but probably the same types of questions as you get older, such as, why am I turning myself into a pretzel for this other person? Like, should I be turning myself into a pretzel?
Literal or metaphorical, physically, emotionally?
Could be.
Should I buy a pretzel for this person?
Yeah. I should preface this because I don't think Andrea and Helen necessarily know this, but Karen actually is a somatic sex educator and has a podcast.
Excellent.
Wild and Sublime, about sex and sexuality. So when I ask her these questions, I mean, she could be talking about anything as far as I know.
I was thinking about when the nieces and nephews, or how they ask to be identified, are younger. I think one of the best things you can do, con permission from parents, is talk about body parts with their actual names. I think that's critical. And for those, Andrea and Helen, that are on the screen, I think that's really important that we're using words like penis and vagina.
100%.
And you as an aunt, maybe you're a step removed from it, so you're not thinking about them yet as sexualized beings. Like parents might like start vibrating about using language that is actually appropriate, but still maybe they're not comfortable using. So you actually are providing, in a way, you're as a service.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Andrea, what you're saying is reminding me that a big conversation in the sex educator arena around sex education for minors is to start building in not only proper terminology. That should be like, really, we have to still say this today. But anyway, but to also build in a pleasure agenda, that this just isn't about genitalia and reproduction.
Right.
This is about teaching people pleasure. Like this is the other major component, because if you're not going to reproduce, or you want to learn how to not to reproduce, whatever it is, there's a larger agenda, which is, how does your body work to produce pleasure?
And when and where is it appropriate to explore that at a very young age? Because a lot of children are shamed at a very young age about just enjoying touching their bodies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We grew up with ridiculous names for vaginas. It's because I come from a family of 3 girls. And you know, when you get to that age where you realize that we don't all have a whizzy wazzy. And I do not know. I don't know where this name came from. And it is just the most ridiculous thing ever. So I advocate for just calling them by their proper names, because you don't want to be the kid that gets to school and thinks that that's what it's called.
Okay, to be clear, the whizzy wazzy was the vagina or the penis, because it could go either way.
Well, that was the interesting thing, is that it was the vagina, but I obviously knew that a penis was called a penis, because apparently one day when I was a kid, we were walking across the crossing and I said very loudly to Mum, "Mummy, does that man have a penis?" So I don't know why there was this disconnect.
Do you think it was the intrinsic shaming of female genitalia, which is so culture-wide?
It is so culture-wide. It absolutely is. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Have you guys lost Andrea?
We lost Andrea.
We did lose her. She was frozen on my knee.
Holding her teacup. She looked lovely.
Well, it was funny. She was like peering over the teacup, and I was like, oh, is she having a moment of like, oh, they're talking about...
Or maybe it was a Lewis Carroll kind of moment. Because I was thinking he might be responsible for the whizzy wazzy.
He could have been the whizzy wazzy.
Oh my God, that's so Lewis Carroll.
Yeah.
No,
it's the hunting of the snark.
Yeah.
We're going to look for the whizzy wazzy.
Oh, I know, it's so ridiculous. I don't know where it came from. I'm going to have to ask to Mum and Dad who came up with this abomination. Yes.
So do you find that, in light of the question, and what came up for you first, do you find that your own siblings grapple?
Yeah.
I'm going to give that a yes.
I'm not so sure because each sister has a child. So the sister with the daughter, she has two mums, so they're in a gay relationship. And so there is a lot of emphasis, which I like, on body autonomy and on consent and that sort of thing. And I actually do that with both of them, really, as I always say to them, oh, can I hug you? Can I give you a hug? Because I don't like when people force children to hug adults.
Oh,
agreed.
That's a huge thing.
So I want them to feel that they don't have to hug me if they don't want to. I'm fine with it.
Yeah, it's really interesting you're bringing this up, Helen, because like in consent circles, like this is really being discussed of parents forcing their children to touch
other people
or to give grandma a hug, and the kids a lot of times like, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And so to override the child's desire not to be touched is...
And the whole thing about no.
Yeah.
You're saying no is not no for that little being at a very young age. And they're being conditioned to that, like, oh, this is blurry.
Yeah.
Yes. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then that has huge ramifications as the child gets older.
Potentially,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, because we were definitely, so I am coming up to 41, and so my childhood was the 80s into the early 90s, and definitely of that generation where it was hug grandma, hug grandpa, and it was, I don't know, do I want to? Do I have a choice? So I think with my sisters, there is definitely an emphasis on that sort of body autonomy, and I think with the boys, it's more around what's appropriate in terms of physicality at the age that he's at, is sort of learning that if you get physical with someone else, they're probably not going to want to be your friend for very long, because that's not a respectful way to treat another person.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't mean for things to take a dark turn, but we know statistically that the majority of children who are abused, it's by a relative.
Yes.
So,
right.
And pretending that that's not the case, and not having, again, I think this goes back to what you talk about with the younger people in your life, whether they're your children or your nieces and nephews, and why. I think purpose is really important, and consistency in narrative. That's why I think the same language is really important, and why you're telling them about it. I'm also a big believer in scaffolding and using the language, asking them questions. Well, what do you know about that? Being really curious, because I am so delighted often how a child defines something and they'll ask you a question like, so once I was asked about hot dogging, my child said, Mommy, they were hot dogging that girl. Ugh. And so I'm like, I have an idea what I think that is, but I'm like, well, child, what is hot dogging? And it was everybody was sliding down the slide together. It was something totally innocuous. But if you don't ask, you might go down a path that you didn't really mean to go down.
Yeah.
Which you reminded me, Andrea, is that, because I love the idea that you just ask, what does that mean to you? Mm-hmm. Because I didn't know what dildo meant. And so I was talking about dildos at age 7, because like in the playground, that was a dumb person. A dildo was a dumb person.
Oh, how interesting.
And so my dad's like, Karen, don't use that word. And I said, well, what does it mean? He's like, what did he say? He goes, it is a fake penis. And which left me even more confused, because I was like, what? But what? But yeah, when Andrea was talking, I was thinking to myself, yes, parents, and this happens across the board. Whenever a person is in an authority position, I'm thinking of doctors, because we've had several episodes about doctors and their relationship with patients around talking about sexuality, that you bring your own shame to the table.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So you as a parent are bringing your own shame to the conversation about sexuality with your kid.
Yes.
And so if you are saying whizzy wazzy instead of vagina, there's an issue. You as the parent have an issue with saying the
vagina.
Genital's name. Yeah. With saying vagina or vulva.
Yeah, which I find bizarre, because their mum and dad were both biology teachers. And so here we...
Just because this is what we talk about on the show. Just because you're a doctor doesn't mean that you're like cool breeze about everything sexual.
No.
Yeah.
It's actually something that I'm pretty proud of my sister and her husband for, because they do that with their kids. They're very clear and I don't know if it's because my sister is also a preschool teacher and she did all the like childhood development classes or, whatever it is, but it's really refreshing and also a little bit shocking to me sometimes when my niece will say something like, my vagina hurts,
Yep.
or, it's just like a totally normal thing to say. And I'm just like, oh, okay. Or she'll be
Welcome
like,
to the 21st century, Andrea.
I don't know why it still surprises me when she says something so clearly and literally like that, because I don't think that my parents discouraged it necessarily or said that it was shameful or anything, but I feel that her way of communicating is much different than what ours was growing up.
But it's so helpful though. Instead of we could say my elbow hurts, but why can't we say the tip of my penis hurts?
Right.
It's like, it's a body part, people. So I think what you were saying, Karen and Helen too, about being one person removed from the child, I really think really helps greatly, that parents are like, oh, thank God I don't have to have that conversation, or I wasn't really ready for that, or it's too close. It's just really too close.
It is, isn't it? Which I think is it ties into having that person sort of removed that you can talk to, because something I really am trying to foster and encourage with my nephew is I always say to him, you're my friend. I will never ever not be your friend. So if you ever need someone to talk to and you can't talk to mum and dad, that's when you can come to me. And just making sure that he kind of knows that, and that being his cheerleader, because he can be, and I hate saying it, the only way I can describe it is that he feels intently. He's an intense feeler, which I was too. And so I get that part of his personality. He can also then be wounded deeply by other children's actions. And so being that person to say to him, there's nothing wrong with you. You are perfect the way you are, but also sort of guiding with some of that, I guess, behavior that can be sort of like, oh, why did you do that?
I've been needing someone to lean on again. You're not so far from me. So would you think it's too strange if you'd make a friend of me? From the mountains by with fire, lift me up and take me higher. Will you show me that you never giving up? Come lift me up, come pull me up from the
Well, I'm curious, Andrea, for you, since you have nieces and nephews and you also have your own children, are these types of conversations about bodies and sex and dating, are these different with your nieces and nephews than they are with your children? Do you think about them differently? Like, I didn't feel comfortable talking about these topics with any adults whatsoever growing up, for sure.
That's a very good question. I think because what's ironic is that my nieces, I'm quite a bit older. I started having children when I was almost 40. So my nieces and nephews were pretty much adults when I started having children. And I don't think this is unusual for our listeners, that it's kind of a little bit of a training ground and an opportunity to process evaluation. Like, you're not really parenting. You're, like you said, Andrea, you're the fun one. We're having fun together. And I can give you a very good example. My two oldest nieces were staying with me, and they were 5 and 3, and was living in Santa Fe at the time. And we were going to go to a New Year's Eve dinner with two of my best friends who were two gay men. And we went to dinner and we all got dressed up and we were all super excited. And my older niece, TC, walked in and she was like, it was so uncomfortable. And it never occurred to me to have prepped this beautiful little 5-year-old being, because it was like, well, that's how people are. And that's not how people were for her. And we've all had some growth and discovery about how people are, but not at 5. That was completely outside of her realm of understanding, that these two people were partnered and were kissing. And she was paralyzed with discomfort. So this topic of sexuality and what does it mean to be a human and intimate with other beings, taking a moment and thinking, okay, have I really thought through what the experience is that I'm putting or introducing? Let's say it in a way that's, introducing my little precious being into. Have I really thought through what this is? And I'm going to own it. I was young, but it was a great learning for me. And we're good. We're still, a couple decades later, we're still fine. So yes, I did learn things that helped me with my children as they became verbal, but even pre-verbal. It doesn't matter how old you are, you're still a person. And we are autonomous beings in some way from the moment we're born. We're moving away from that vessel out into the world and becoming from that very moment. And it is wonderful when we have that opportunity as people who walked the earth a little bit longer, but to think about what the responsibility is. I think that's it. I don't want to make it too heavy, but we have a responsibility.
Yeah. With my niece, who's 4, she loves books, which is like, yay, she loves books. Just like
right?
Magic. And she and I have gone to the library in Chicago. So she lives in the suburbs. And I did take her to the library in Chicago. And it was during Pride. And so the library had featured a bunch of children's books along that theme. And I'm going to go ahead and say, I don't think there were any books on that theme for children when I was a child. But now there are lots. And one of the books that we got is this beautiful picture book. And I'm going to have to look it up and link to it in the show notes. This woman she's made a few of them about this character named Julian, who's a little boy I think probably in New York. And they're exploring gender and sexuality. And one book is Julian wants to be a mermaid. And what is that? And there's this whole fantasy. He sees these girls, these adolescent girls who are splashing in the water and playing joyfully. And he's inspired by that. And he has this whole fantasy about becoming a mermaid like them. And she's fascinated by this book. The pictures are gorgeous. And she's just slowly turning the pages. And she's like, why is Julian turning into a mermaid? Why? She just is naturally asking a lot of questions about what's happening. And then there's another book that I found that's a follow-up that is that same character. And Julian goes to a wedding, and it's 2 women who are getting married. The book is not about the women getting married. He happens to be at a wedding, and it happens to be 2 brides. And it's just fascinating how that's not the point of the story. It's not 2 women are getting married and this is, but it's part of the world that is a captivating enough and interesting enough world for her that she's taking it in. And I think this now becomes part of her norm. In the moment, it's curious to her, but weddings, she's never been to a wedding. She only knows what she's seeing in TV and books and things like that. And I'm like, this is really fascinating as an experiment to see, does this position her to understand things differently or sooner or something like that?
That's really interesting. I had a series of books when I was little. It's probably before school. And it was about a little boy called Alex who had a single mum or mom. I think they were from the US. And his best friend was an African-American little boy. And none of it was about that in particular. It was about a school outing where they ate I remember they ate berries or something along those lines. But I think it does. I think those books about things that we come across as children, and they shouldn't be weird because there are single parents out there and there are lots of diverse people. And it does plant that seed that actually you're going to come across these situations and it's actually very normal.
And now the moment you've been waiting for, Ask Aunties. So one of our segments on the show is Ask Aunties, where people can submit questions for our panel to answer. And I do have a question from an anonymous audience member. You ready?
Mm-hmm. Depends on the question.
How do I give my teenage niece advice or information about safer sex, sexual hygiene, contraception options, etc., when my point of view is very different from her parents', i.e., they are mostly in the shame and abstinence camp? I know she has been given a lot of misinformation, and she sometimes asks me questions I feel like I could get in trouble for answering honestly.
Oh, I have an immediate answer. There is an amazing resource out there, and I would be remiss not to talk about it. Well, there's two resources. One is a website called Scarleteen, SCARLETEEN, scarleteen.com. And it is for adolescents and young adults. And it is a resource, a sexual resource. It's extremely inclusive, and it is run by a staff of people. So not only can someone go on the website and get information in terms of pieces that are written straight to the teen, questions about gender, contraception, abortion, the whole thing, everything, consent. But there's also a staff to field like real questions and text. You can have text conversations with staff members. And it was founded by a person named Heather Corinna. And Heather Corinna has also written a book called Sex, S-E-X, it's S.E.X. A guide to sexuality for teens and young adults. I think that's the subtitle, but that's a remarkable book. What I like about this resource, the website Scarleteen, is that it gives all points of view. And it's great if someone's in a jam, because it's a lot about, I was laying down with a boy and we didn't have our clothes on and, his semen got on me and I'm really scared. It's that kind of like the stuff that flips us out when we're teens.
Yeah.
And I can't recommend it enough.
I really like that because I'm in two minds because I'm a little bit of I guess I've got that rebellious streak where I think, it breaks my heart to think that I grew up in that generation of no one taught me that intimacy wasn't just sex. And so I wish for instance, I'd been taught that intimacy is actually a lot more than that. And I think that feeds into that shame and that there's only, abstinence or the other way and all that sort of thing. And so I would like to advocate for that person to either nudge them in the right direction for inclusive and loving information, because I know there could be that sort of boundary crossing if your parents are. But then I also think, well, you know what? That, we know how dangerous that is. We know the impact that shame can have on a person and their sexuality. And we also know that abstinence does not work. And being empowered in knowledge and what is okay for us, I think, is a really loving thing to do for the young ones in our lives.
And I think I'm somewhere in between. I love knowing about the resource. And that was my first thought, Karen. Gosh, it'd be great if there was something I could direct the parent to as well as the child, young adult. So my question back to Anonymous would be, did they come to you and ask? Because I think that's actually, if they ask you, Helen, I'm right there with you. I'm going to answer. I get to be me. I get to be my own person. And if my sister, brother-in-law, et cetera, are unhappy with what I've done, then that's a conversation that we have as well. It's back to what we were talking about earlier, agency over your own body and what's going on with you. Gosh, aren't we better if the curiosity's there, the concern from the person themselves is there, talking about it rather than folding it under. And we know kids are sexually active. We know they're exploring. I mean, acting as though it's not happening is not doing anyone any favors. So that's my kind of like, so did the niece or nephew come to you, or are you concerned? And if you're concerned, I say, if you ever have questions about these things, there's this wonderful resource.
Yeah, my partner's daughters, they are teenagers, and one of them has asked me questions. And I also felt a little like, she had gone to a doctor, an OBGYN. She is on birth control, but it was like birth control for like hormone regulation or something like that, not for what it's designed for. And she had gone to the doctor and the doctor was giving her shame about it. And she was saying how upsetting it was to her that the doctor was making her feel bad. There's this part of me that's like, you should go to Planned Parenthood. It's way better than going to the doctor for stuff like this when you're a teenager. Like, there's so much more. I don't know if New Zealand has Planned Parenthood. Do they?
Yeah, it's called family planning, which I guess is just a play. Yeah, we do. We have services for young ones or more accessible. Because I think when you talked about shame, it instantly made me think of my first sexual experience was not what I would want anyone else to go. You know, it just wasn't what you would hope for.
Yeah.
And so I had to go and get the morning after pill, and I had that shame from the nurse who pulled out. I laugh now, even though it's ridiculous, but she pulled out one of those wooden penises that you do to practice the condom. And she said, "This is how you put a condom on." And she said, "Do you need the pill, or do you think you'll be doing this again?" And it's just like,
wow.
I just remember her pulling out that wooden penis out of the drawer and
my
just
God.
putting it on. And so I guess putting them in the direction of kind and open and inclusive and non-shaming information is just, I just hope if anyone came to me, that's what I would steer them towards, because I just think be the adult that, you could have done with in your youth if you didn't have that. And so that's the way I approach those things.
Oh, hey, it must be time for Cool Things Aunties Do. A time for us to shine in our own awesomeness.
I suspect all of you will light up when I say this. A cool things Auntie do, number one, and however it manifests, is it's a judgment-free zone. I think that's the coolest Auntie thing you can do.
Yeah.
Is maintain that judgment-free zone. And whether it's you getting on the ground and rolling around and playing, which is something that I like to do still with particularly my great nieces and nephews, is just, putting it aside and meeting them where they are when they're 2 years old. What's better than hearing that laughter because you're just goofy with them? I mean, that's probably, I think, one of my great skills as a cool auntie. Judgment-free zone.
I feel like I do that with Riv sometimes because I think all small children, especially when they're toddlers, have these behaviors that they do when they're not getting the attention that they want or they're not getting...
Yes.
You're not doing the thing that they want. And then they have, they develop a specific thing that they do. Mm-hmm. And with her, she will lay down on the ground on her back, flat. She doesn't flail around anything. It's very creepy because she's very calm. She just slowly lays down. She doesn't throw herself down, slowly lays down on the ground. And you can see her getting worked up and she starts yelling or crying. And I actually have to hold in, I have to not laugh because my reaction is that I want to laugh. Mm-hmm. But instead, with that judgment-free thing, I'm like, okay, if this is what you want to do right now, this is fine. And then when we're done, we can go on to doing something that's fun.
I think for me, the awesome auntie moment is complete confidentiality. Mm-hmm. Unless it is something that is, injurious to the person's health or, but complete confidentiality, because there might be things coming across the texts that might be oh, I wonder if, my friend knows this, but this is cone of silence, right?
That's a good question. I wonder, I haven't thought about that. Would there be stuff that I just wouldn't tell my sister?
There will be.
Yeah.
There will be. And what Karen said, you'll know the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that idea of judgment-free zone because I think one of the things I try really hard to do with my nephew, particularly, I have a lot to do with my nephew. I have since he was a baby, and my sister and her partner moved back from the UK with him. Because my family, we weren't big on feelings or being able to talk about feelings. So it's something I really try and do with him is create a space or try and give him the language for identifying what's going on, which I think is important. I think of a time when I was very sick, I had cancer and I was going through treatment and it was a big time for everyone. And I picked him up from school and he was such a toad. He was being such a toad. And I was getting oh my God, what is wrong with this child? But I just had a moment where I thought, what's actually going on here? And so I sat him on my knee and I said, what's happened today? tell me what's happened. You know, are you feeling angry at something? You know, and just gave him that space to go, such and such did this thing, or, you know, whatever had happened. And yeah, that's something that I like to try and do with him, is to arm him with language or space to be able to say, this is what's going on. I'm really frustrated, because my fear with him, because he can be naughty at school and things, I think that the way school isn't good for the way his brain works. And so he's often in trouble. And so I kind of want him to have that one person where he can talk freely about how he feels and isn't constantly telling him off for feeling a certain way. That makes sense, yeah.
That is a huge topic that we need to talk about on a future episode in terms of these expectations, like gendered expectations. And I know that with boys, the only emotion you're really allowed to feel or allowed to express is anger.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Like everything else is not okay. And so therefore everything sort of gets like mutated into
uber confidence.
Right.
And that's, you know, the two states of being that are okay. Dominance and anger.
Yeah.
Dominance and rage. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know what it's like in the States, but here we are a sporting nation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so he does play a sport and appears to like it, but he's also very creative and very, he likes to do experiments. It's just, you know, making potions and things. And he comes up with these amazing ideas and stories, I think. And for children, it's either, you know, it's so dichotomous at school of the way people are that it's really hard to be anything other than the sporty little boy. Yeah.
So any closing thoughts, things that you think that aunties should think about as we move into Valentine's Day, or any other resources that you want to make sure we have on the list?
Well, there was something that Helen said that had been on my mind before we started recording, and it's around approaching your nephew and what was going on and what was wrong that day in his world. It's one of the key things for kids and sexuality or moving into romantic relationships is helping the child go within and ascertain what's going on with me, like almost blanking the paramour or the other person out and being like, how am I feeling? You know, what's going on with me? And I think we get so reactive, and there is a gendered thing also. I think if you're female identifying, looking always to the outer, the potential mate or whatever, how are they doing? And what should I do to accommodate? But it's like, it's helping children go within and just sit and be quiet and say, okay, this is what's going on with me. I think that's half of it, seriously, especially around sexuality and relationships, is being able to listen to your own voice inside.
I love, Karen, that you did that. You brought it back to where you started with that. It's like Valentine's Day, don't forget self-love. And if we can provide our little people who someday become big people and then have little people in their lives, let's face it, that's another thing. There's legacy love here, people. That if we can provide that gift, like, how do you take care of yourself? How do you show love for yourself? That's auntie superpower right there, if I've ever heard of one.
Yeah. Oh, it really is the start of it, isn't it? Because I wish someone had taught me that I'm okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is how you look after yourself. Because if you know within yourself that I'm okay, then you are probably less likely to have people trample all over you, take advantage of you. And I think, I imagine with that sexuality, that's where it starts, is I'm a valuable human being and I am lovable.
And let's start with I love me.
Yeah.
I'm lovable because I love me.
Yeah, I don't want anyone to get to 40 and go, oh, actually, I'm okay. I'm all right.
It can happen sooner.
Yeah.
I'm okay, you're okay, I love me. There's no better affirmation than that. And when we love ourselves deeply, truly, and honestly and madly, it's so much easier to care for and love those young folks who look up to us in our lives and teach them to do the same. No matter where you are, who you're with, what you're doing, or what time of year it is right now, I wish you happy Valentine's Day. And I can't wait to connect with you for even more Improve with Auntie.
Improve with Auntie is produced by the Creative Imposter Studios.
We are edited by Maddie Shuchuk and Andrea Klunder.
Our technical director is Edwin R. Ruiz.
Music curation and sound design by Andrea Klunder.
Cover art designed by Cindy Alcantara.
Show notes by Lisa Witter.
Follow us on Instagram at Improve with Auntie.
If you have a question for Ask Aunties, a proud auntie moment, or a how not to auntie tale, you can email us or send us a voice note.
Check the show notes for all the ways we can connect at improvewithauntie.com. Thanks so much for sharing your time, your energy, your presence. We appreciate you at Improve with Auntie.